Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the Researchers Forum for the IACD, the International Association for Community Development. My name is Laurie Cook, and I've been working on developing this session with Emmanuel and Martin from Ghana in Africa. And it's building on what people said they were interested in talking about in the last session, which there is a recording of. Where Emmanuel and I presented, but there was a lot of interest in what kind of research is being done on funding and different funding models for community development work or community development research. So that is the goal for today, is to have a discussion on that topic, and we'll have three sort of main sections. I'm just going to pull up the outline for this session and give you a sense of what that will look like, and I'll put it in the chat as well. But just to share screen for a moment. So this is the outline for the session. Basically, intro to the topic, including the process of the day and the event. The first section will focus on a discussion of any highlights related to challenges from some articles that were provided as part of the Eventbrite. So we did experiment this time in soliciting articles on this topic ahead of time from people, and there were, I think, about 4 different items, which I'll also put in the chat in case you missed them, and you can save chat if you want to save that information and look at those articles later if you didn't have a chance yet. But we're looking to look at what the challenges are right now, and to any observations from the articles that were provided, but also any other observations from attendees from their own experience or work that they're doing. A key question for each section will be, is anyone doing research on this topic? The next section will look at a discussion of solution highlights from the articles or any other solutions or models that have been successful that people are looking to talk about. And then the third section will be a discussion of what kind of role is there for the IACD in this work, in supporting research in the area of funding support for community development work or community development research. And then the last section will be to have a short discussion on planning for the next session, when it will be, about what, and who would be willing to organize that session. So that's the general outline for the session. So I'm going to stop sharing that for the moment. And instead, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab it and put it in the chat as well. So there is the outline in the chat as well. I also wanted to highlight, before we get going, the articles that we did receive and what the purpose of the discussion is. So I'm just going to share screen again briefly. And so the purpose of the discussion is to look at the challenges and solutions to finding funding and encouraging funding models that support doing community development work and/or research that is participatory, engaged, and values the expertise of people experiencing the issues being worked on or studied in community, as per the IACD standards, which, if you haven't seen the IACD standards yet on the website, I would encourage you to check those out. But we're trying to, in this session, bring in a little more reference to those standards as part of our conversation. Also, as I mentioned, the key question being, is there research being done on this topic? And if so, by who? And then these were the articles that were on the Eventbrite and available for discussion and for people to review in advance. One was published in the Philanthropist Journal, and there's some information there on what it was about. I'll also put this in the chat. Another, a good friend of mine, Ryan Gibson, and a colleague of his who is based in Canada, submitted something on community investment funds and their potential to advance rural community development. I also ran across a book called Funding, Power, and Community Development. Not very old either, 2019. And chapter 9, I thought was very interesting because it's a dialogue between a community developer and a funder on the topic of the book. So I thought that chapter especially was very interesting. And then more recently, I ran across an article called Sankofa Philanthropy, Hip Hop's Sixth Element. And it talks about how various hip hop artists are acting now as very strong funders and philanthropists within their own community. So those are just some of the articles, and I'll just put those in the chat as well. So in terms of carrying on, I'm just going to go back to, hopefully everyone can see the agenda that's in the chat. But the first session that we're going to do, where we're going to break out, is on the topic of the idea of challenges, and whether either discussion of challenges that came up in the articles or discussion of anything else that anybody would like to talk about related to challenges related to funding, and any research that's being done related to challenges related to community development work. So we're going to have about 10 minutes for a breakout, and then we're going to have 10 minutes to harvest highlights. Okay? Yeah, I have a feeling this might be a conversation where we're just starting to scratch the surface today, but hopefully we'll get some good conversations. Is there anyone, I'm just going to go popcorn style. So is there anyone who would like to speak on behalf of their group, their conversation, and just share some highlights from that conversation? And I'll just ask if you can be mindful. We have about 10 minutes to do a harvest.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first here, Laurie. So in the group that we were in, we just very quickly talked about the difficulty of getting grant funding, certainly from the location of I'm in the US, and we talk about grants with an emphasis on very small rural communities, which there aren't very many aligned to that. Julian talked about the idea of being in smaller communities in New Zealand, and the difficulty in finding funding for and enough funding to go around for everybody that were working in these communities and wanting to do projects. We also quickly talked about the different kinds of approaches perhaps that we could engage in, and the idea of alternative type economies and approaches, philanthropics that were more aligned to community development, or in my case, the idea of perhaps trying to foster more community aligned cooperatives, and the notion that perhaps we should start focusing a little more locally, and the notion of buying local, living local, thinking about how things can come together locally, either through cooperatives or something of that nature. We also talked about this. I don't know of too much research related to funding and fundraising at this point, but Julian had a little more experience than I did, so maybe we should point him in his direction if we're going to go there. Thank you.
Is there anything you want to add quickly, Julian? Not sure I see him here. I know it was 1 a.m. his time. Anyone else want to share some highlights from their conversation? Okay.
I'll go if you want.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great, Alice.
I was working with Jim, who started highlighting about the increasing difficulties of working with academic institutions, in terms initially of individual researchers being concerned with their own position, and insecurity of tenure, and also the priorities of the academic institution itself. So I'm working with a program called the Ideas Fund that is run by the British Science Association, funded by the Wellcome Trust. And they're working in the north of Ireland, the north of Scotland, and Oldham and Hull on a wellbeing project. And their model is that the community group goes into partnership with a researcher. I'm one of only 2 independent researchers working with groups here, and so we've had multiple discussions at our communities of practice meetings about the challenges of going through, which I can't say without laughing, the so-called ethical processes of the universities, which are took up half of the duration of the project in its first year. And the whole program works on mental health. So it was simply to fund people who had an idea about how to improve people's mental health. But for example, of the university, one of the projects had been compelled by the researcher to use a randomization process for participants who wanted to do a mental health program without any reference to the needs of the people concerned who were vulnerable. So yeah, that was the challenges that we talked about, and I look forward to talking about the good stuff.
Yeah. So we have about a minute or so left. If there's one more person that would like to share some highlights before we go into the second session or second question, that would be great. Just quickly.
In our group with Linda
Sure.
and Shulan, we'd read the first article, which was a community-based model of allocating grant funding, which a philanthropic organisation had devised, and we felt that had many good points. But the thing that struck us was we didn't have much information there about how they would ensure that the community panels are representative in terms of the different interest groups, different areas. What counts as fair? Just because the community is deciding it, does it mean they've got a good idea of fairness? Linda gave examples of the intense rural racism in Canada where she works. So recognizing this is an issue that we come up all the time in community development, but we need the funding bodies to be able to think that through and not just think, oh yeah, great idea, hand over decisions to the community when there isn't really a homogenous community there anyway. So those were some of our thoughts.
Righto, thank you very much. So we're going to move on. Oh, go ahead, Emmanuel.
Yes, the last point by Sarah is similar to an issue raised by DeWitt, who was a colleague in the breakout room. So I think that so when donor agencies want to allocate these funds to communities, it shouldn't always be the case that the donor agency wants to satisfy perhaps their contributors or their donors, so they set out certain formal requirements. Now, I'm saying this because a lot of these formal requirements, when you come to maybe very rural Africa, you realize that on the ground there may be organizations that are doing the work in the communities. But when it comes to these formal requirements, it cuts them out of the loop. It cuts them out of the opportunity chain. And so donors need to look at the formality or the kind of requirements that it asks. Now, these small organizations too, please, we are talking in the context of asset-based community development, where participatory planning is crucial, where beneficiaries are supposed to play an active frontline role in planning, in funding, in implementation, in monitoring and evaluation of interventions. And so if the donor agency comes, and I stated in my last presentation to this forum, that the community will not argue with you because they are distressed, they are needy, they need help, and you have come with something. A beggar doesn't have a choice. And so whichever way the funding is couched whatever requirements or strings are attached to it, the community will first and foremost say, yes, we agree. We are going to play by your rules. But going forward, we realize that it does not help the sustainability of the intervention, because the community doesn't end up empowered, and because the rules itself or the requirements are not, do not identify with their own reality, they may be trying to shuffle things just to look good or to, be part of the process. And so that has to be looked at. Then secondly, the idea of competition. Many times, small community-based organizations, like I said, when you come to the ground in Africa, rural, even urban Africa, the communities, you come to you see maybe women's group, youth groups, they are in their communities, loosely organized group, but they get done what needs to be done. They are working in sanitation. If you need labor to put up water systems, they are there. If you want to do advocacy as a preventive measure against child rights or something, they are there. But they are a loosely organized group. They may not have any formal, they may not be incorporated formally and things like that. And so these groups will have to compete during seeking funding with organizations like maybe a JICA or GIZ or DFID, or there is no way they can compete. And so all the time, it looks like all the money is going to one side, while the people who should be receiving even just crumbs for the crucial work that they do for the actual change that takes place on the ground. So how do we juggle this? So that is another thing. Apart from the formal requirements, then there is the competition. Now, collaboration. When we find two or more organizations within the same geographical location, what do? Do we try to balance their capacities? Do we try to create synergy between them? Because yes, I may be working with a very local organization, but if there is an organization that has greater capacity and that has more funds, how do we come together? Or is it a case that if we are to seek funding from the same local source, this person or that other group will say, oh, we have the capacity, we have existed for longer, we are incorporated, we have all the formal connections and things, so we look good on paper. Meanwhile, the other organization, my small organization, may be a community-based organization, may be associated with all the reality, may be able to identify with the reality on the ground. So please, as a research group, how do we ensure that some of these things will play out in future research for these purposes so that change can be made? Then, so that's about it. And now, regarding collaboration again, it should not always seem that because the community is poor, then it means they are not knowledgeable about what needs to be done to change their situation. The funding agency must not be seen to be imposing their decision on the beneficiary community. So I think those are some of the highlights of our brief discussion in our breakout room. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Emmanuel. And great lead in to our next conversation and the next question, which is basically to look at, we're looking for bright spots. So of the challenges that were just identified, is there anyone doing work to help address these challenges and actually create change in these areas? And is there anyone doing work on the ground at a practical level? But also, is there anyone doing research on these topics, and including all the ones that were just identified? So we're going to go into a breakout group again. It could be the same people, Jessica, if that's easy, whatever works.
I just actually reshuffled everyone. I hope that's
okay. That's fine. No worries. But the idea is, where is there some innovation happening to actually address these challenges, some bright spots, some solutions, and are there people doing research on these, finding ways to address these challenges, basically? And I just put that question in the chat as well. Okay, thanks, Jessica. Send us out then. So we're back. And so the last question was sort of ideally discussion of solutions and highlights of research that's being done in this area, some bright spots, hopefully, or models that are working or seem to be innovative and could help address some of the challenges that were identified earlier. Yeah, so again, popcorn style, if anyone, maybe starting with someone who hasn't spoken yet, would be great. And to share from their group. And
sorry, Laurie, just to interrupt us, two people have joined, Henry and Richmond, just so you know that they're here.
Okay, great, thank you. Welcome. So yeah, anyone, again, popcorn style, anyone want to just volunteer some highlights from your conversation and just let us know what sort of things you talked about?
I would like to introduce Julian to give his view, because he had me and Manuel, we had a good discussion, but he had a different view, and I'd like him to bring that to us, to the table. Julian?
Right, yeah, kia ora, Julian from Wellington, New Zealand. Yeah, we were talking about if you are a small group, often if you're not incorporated or if you're a trust, then it is very hard to get funding. One of the ways around that is if you can have like an umbrella group above you that can hold the funding for you. And you have, the best way is to have a memorandum of understanding on how that funding will be utilised or distributed into the particular areas, especially if you've got 2 or 3 areas that are linked together, but you know, that they may be in different smaller communities, or they may be part of a bigger region, but then you need to actually work together within that region. So therefore that funding has to be spread geographically and probably demographically over a number of spaces. So that was the basics of it.
Okay, anyone else want to share anything from your group discussion?
Yes, I just want to go briefly on what Julian just said. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, we have to realize that in the community development, especially asset-based community development, geographical location really matters. And so, for instance, with the proposition just made by Julian, it's solid and it can easily work in most European countries or in most Western countries. But I think that for a typical African country like Ghana, a typical community in Ghana, going back to re-centralize things is not something that may actually work. It may work, but it will give us some more challenges. Because first of all, even with the government structure, there is supposed to be decentralization, which is supposed to be non-partisan. But as we speak, partisanship is not helping to deliver the goods that the local government and decentralization system should deliver. Parties are sponsoring candidates to local elections. And so that's a fundamental challenge. What I think, and I was just making that point in our group with Duet, that I think we should be creating community representative groups every local level, in every local community. So for instance, yes, we can't bring all the community people together if there are tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. But who are the community? When you say want to meet a representative group, every community in Africa has traditional leadership. And traditional leadership are the custodians of land and traditional morality and law in every community. Even in the urban centers, there are traditional leaders. So you have traditional leadership, you have elected officials. Members of parliament oversee constituencies with multiple communities, but local government also elects an assembly member for each community. So if you have traditional leadership and you have the elected officials, now in every community, aside the elected assembly member, there are also 5 unit committee members. And I'm talking for Ghana, in the case of Ghana as an example. Now, aside the elected officials, we can see community-based organizations, youth groups, women's groups, even religious groups who are actually doing some work on the ground and making a difference. You bring representatives from these groups. Then you also see if there are any NGOs or non-profit organizations working in that area on the issues or in the geographical area. Then you bring representatives from these groups as well. Now, let us not forget something, that in a typical community setting, if there are we put even this group together, we will always be looking to the representatives of the funding agency and be waiting to hear them. Most people would like to be aligning and cooperating with the funding agency, even if they are wrong, because they are the funding agency. And so I also propose that in such groupings, the representatives of such multilaterals or a funding agency or government should be very, very minimal. They should be more like observers and allow the community people to take the leadership and ownership of the group and the activities of the group. When we do that, we will see that at every corner of the community, somebody will know about what is happening, because these people live in the community and they work there and they can send the messages across everywhere. Otherwise, from what I experience, what I know about how things are working in Africa especially, politics can make things look very different. Corruption can really make things very murky. And so going back to centralize these kind of community-based issues that are supposed to be local will not be the best way to go. But I know, like I said, that these can perfectly work in a Western environment, because everybody may be aware, or a significant number of the residents or citizens in that geographical location may be aware, they may have the basic tools. Imagine you go to a community where internet connectivity is so low, where even the whole community or maybe a half of the community may have to gather under one tree or at one person's house to watch TV or listen to radio. And these are realities. You find such communities. And
Right.
so if we say we want these people to collaborate in an umbrella organization, we have to look at how inferior they already feel about themselves in relation to other people. Let's build a group for them, a local group that they all identify with, that they know who the members are, and let us juggle things at that level. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Emmanuel. Anyone else want to share from the conversation?
I'd like
Oh,
to share my
sure.
bright spot again.
Yeah, Alison.
So my bright spot is the organization, the program that I talked about earlier. So it was the British Science Association, which isn't social science. This is an organization that tries to bring science to the people, who decided during the COVID pandemic that we needed new approaches to improving mental health and mental well-being. And they designed a program. I wish I had it in front of me. It's 2 lines. It's to enable citizens, ordinary people, to come up with and test ideas to improve mental health. That's all. Their only stipulation is that the community organisation works in partnership with a researcher, so that there's another strand of thinking and that the work is recorded. And that's it. So I was just saying to Shilan, it has been the most extraordinary and unnerving experience to work with a funder who is just letting you be completely participative led, which often means nothing happening, which we're not used to for some time. So I think it's been more unnerving for us than it has been for the funder. And so that means that the participants who we're working with have come up with ideas that we would never have come up with in a million years. So in all my life, I have never worked in an environment which has enabled that process.
Right.
And actually, I wanted them to come today, but they weren't able. But so it doesn't matter whether you fail. People, have tried multiple things. The program is funded at the most disadvantaged parts of the north of Ireland, and the Scottish Highlands, and Oldham and Hull, as I mentioned before. So for example, the Scottish Islands is logistically a very difficult. Rural doesn't even describe it. But they just we continue to hold hands with the community group, keep the faith, and allow the participants to come up with this new thinking.
Yeah, no, that's great. Emmanuel, I see that you have your hand up. I'm wondering if you can just, in the interest of time, if you can just make your comment very short.
Very quick. So it's a bright spot that I learned from working with the SOS Children's Villages in their family strengthening program in Ghana, Choco. So this is how they structured the thing. At the community level, we have the stakeholders. The stakeholders is a group of like between 50 and 60 people. They meet quarterly. Now it's made up of community-based organizations, elected officials, the same group that I mentioned. Now, out of the stakeholder group, they tease out or they select about 15 people from that same group to form the program management committee, which they call the steering committee. So that has an SOS rep there. But the chairman is actually a member from the community, selected by the community people. Now they meet monthly to review previous month's activities and plan the impending month's activities. Then they also have subcommittees from among the stakeholder group again. If there are any smaller committees, child protection committee, TVET committee, we build from this same stakeholder group so that we know that every 3 months when we meet, we are coming to take stock of the work that all of us have done in different areas. And then we are also coming to listen to a report from the program management committee, which is constituted from among us. So this is a bright spot that I wanted to share. We can go into the details later, or I can put a short paper on it together and share with all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Yeah, I think I had a feeling today would be just a scratching the surface kind of conversation. There's lots to talk about here in Canada. In the conversations I've been in, some of the things we've talked about are co-ops as a way of people self-organizing. Certainly in Canada, the community economic development investment funds are a form of co-ops, where people who are interested in a particular issue can pool their resources, but not everybody knows about these funds. And they are a little tricky to get set up and started because they're investment funds. And so there's lots of rules around them and that sort of thing. And then I was talking with Linda from Alberta, and we were talking about the MyTax program, which is a program where a community organization can hire a graduate student, or actually you can be an undergraduate, master's, or PhD student to help an organization build their capacity, to do some research for them, to help them. But really one of the key things we were talking about is the need for reciprocity, and the importance of reciprocity as part of the process of getting funding and making sure that out of that experience, the organization gets something valuable to them out of that experience. And also the question of language came up. The idea that not all funders use language around community development that we might want to use. They have their own particular language or terms that they're using. And in order to get money, you often just have to use their language. So I think there's some issues there that could be really interesting for the IACD members to dig into in some way. So the third question, and I'm not going to do breakout groups for this question, we'll just have a whole group conversation about this. But really coming out of this conversation, The third question is sort of what kind of role is there for the IACD in this work, in supporting research in this area, and developing best practice in highlighting not just challenges, not just problems, not just issues, but also where new ideas are taking root and new approaches to funding and to that relationship between a community organization or community development, people involved in community development, whether as volunteers or as professionals, accessing funding. So what role do you think is there for the IACD in supporting, considering this is a researchers forum, research in this area in order to address those things? And I'm just gonna, anyone who wants to talk, just pop up. But also I'd ask if we can take a moment to allow people who maybe haven't spoken recently to have a chance to speak as well. So, and I think I just put that in the chat, that question. Yeah, just so if you're wondering what the question was. I see hands up. Hamidu, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry, am I audible enough?
Yes, you are, Doc.
Am I audible enough?
Yes, Doc.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I've been having network issue. In that case, research in that area will, first of all, the research will take more root if it is qualitative. Qualitative because most of the community-based organizations are, just like the name implies, they are community-based. So they interact, they do everything on the basis of the local language, the indigenous language. And as such, getting a qualitative study done will also, as what we call power structure of the community. So, and then from there, anything that involves research on that, anybody who is going to do such a research will also have to understand the culture and the peculiarity of such an organization. And one of the models to use is participatory rural appraisal, which will now give us
Oh, we seem to be having some technical issues.
Of everything, because we know either fundraising or okay, later somebody can take over.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on what you think the role of the IACD is, especially in regards to research on these topics is? Emmanuel, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Briefly, and to add to what Hamidou said, I think the IACD position on this matter is quite clear. It's for community development organizations and practitioners to do participatory planning, which means that the planning has to be done with the beneficiaries right from the word go. But this is a global imperative. And so I think the role of the IACD and all of us here now is to see how we can make this global imperative a local reality. And so we also know that different regions across the world may have different realities. We in Sub-Saharan Africa, we know that we are the poorest region. And if this works, we may be benefiting more than any other region. And sometimes that makes us passionate about this issue. And so the question we're asking is that IACD says community development interventions should be done in an environment of participatory planning. Are we doing that? Or does the IACD have to highlight that to all community development organizations globally? Because it's a global imperative. IACD is a global organization. And so when we take that, what does that mean for Sub-Saharan Africa? Then at the regional level, perhaps we should have a working group that will see, because even within specific regions, different countries may have different situations. For instance, Ghana is very different from South Africa. And so even if you say we are going to localize this global imperative, how we approach it for South Africa may be different from how we approach it in Ghana, even though we all belong to Sub-Saharan Africa. But the imperative, the IACD's position is very clear: participatory planning. And I like the call by Laurie for reciprocity, because when you are dealing with people, it doesn't matter which side of the table you are. Once it's supposed to be participatory, you want them to see that when they show you positive gestures, they get a positive gestures in return. And then let's be collaborative in our thinking. It shouldn't be like, yes, you are coming with the funding, and so you have to dictate to the people. Like Sarah said, or one of the speakers said, Alison said, there is information you can get from a local person who may not even be able to speak the lingua franca of the country, but very valuable to your intervention. So I think what IACD is saying about this is very clear. The next step is how we localize the global imperative set by IACD. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Emmanuel. Jim, I see your hand is up.
Yes, just two particular things, and trying to respond to things that the IACD might do, and in some ways things that IACD have done. And it's just to say the emphasis, that IACD has given to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals was a very, very helpful, kind of relatively simple model, in terms of being able to convey that. And it's in many of the groups that I've been involved with, they've found these, the identification of these goals quite helpful, and the connectedness between them, and in some ways, in a nearly kind of cheeky way. I mean, it's possible to say at the local level and in the business people looking at these. I mean, if you don't have an interest in one of these kind of goals, what are you interested in? Because they're actually quite broad and quite wide-ranging. And so that was one aspect. A particular thing which I don't think IACD has done a great deal of work on, and apologize if I've missed it, but there are some initiatives at present that go under the label of community wealth building. And it's sometimes called the Preston model for those who are living in England. But the interesting thing for me of the community wealth building thinking and how it might work is that it's quite clear about the 5 key principles that underpin it. And in many ways, these are challenging to the kind of society that we have in the UK and perhaps in other locations. For example, one principle which is close to community development is the notion of plural ownership of the economy. What is the situation? Making financial power work for local places, fair employment and just labour markets, progressive procurement of goods and services, socially productive use of land and property. Now, these 5 principles that underpin the idea of community wealth building are very close to my understanding of community development values and principles. And certainly in the UK sense, these kind of values do actually challenge the status quo, where we're currently, for the last 10, 15 years, have experienced the privatization, for example, of public services. Universities have responded in a way which allows them to fit into the existing structure and find it difficult to be challenging, in a way. So I'm just saying that this idea of community wealth building, and it's reasonably well documented, in the literature from an organization called CLES, Community Local Economic Strategies. So you might find these values interesting, but I was surprised if the values didn't challenge all of the context of the people who are here, who are working in relatively kind of neo-capitalist systems, really. Anyway, I'm just making that connection if it makes sense.
Sure, and certainly I would just note, I saw Martin up with his hand, but Martin, did you still want to add something? If you want to just add something, but if you could be quick, because we need to talk about what the next session for this forum will be. Martin, did you want to go ahead? Oh, he looks like he's frozen. Okay. Yeah, I was just to build on some of the things that Jim mentioned. I think there is a movement for communities, certainly within Canada and within community based economic development, to find their own resources and to pool resources within community to have more control over resources to help them do different things. And the community economic development investment funds, which also offer a tax credit in many provinces, is one way of doing that. Co-ops are often another way of doing that. But finding ways to pool resources so that communities have more control over funding and are not at the whim of government or more remote organizations, funders, foundations, and so on, I think is an interesting trend that I've noticed in Canada anyway, in terms of growth, but still requires a fairly significant level of capacity, organizational capacity to make use of, but can be called what's called patient capital, and that people are making use of somewhat here. And I think tie in with some of the ideas that you were talking about there, Jim. Just before we go, I want to get a sense of just how you felt about this session, but also any ideas for the next session of this forum, what you would like to see it focus on. And also, if there's anyone who's willing to step up and help organize something. I can't remember when the next session is, Jessica. Do you know when the next session of the Researchers Forum is?
I don't think we've planned a date for it just yet, no.
Oh, okay. And
yeah.
Last time we kind of took a break over the summer. So I think there was something in, June or whatever was the
I think it was
one,
June, yeah.
And then we decided to do one in September. So we could stay with that 3-month timeline or go with 2 months or whatever people feel might be appropriate. But maybe we can start with, does anybody have any ideas for what might be a useful next session to be for this, or any final thoughts or comments on what this session was about? Linda?
Well, I'm going to pivot a little bit, but I'm just wondering, and this could be an offline conversation just with you, but this was my first time attending. So I'm curious as to how people have come to this group, how and why they're here. And also if there's like ongoing conversation about other people that we think would be key or what that looks like. I'm not really sure how the group came together and stuff, so I don't know the history. So I would just be interested in knowing a little bit about that. And then also, I don't want to commit to being able to help organize it without knowing what kind of that commitment would be like, but I would be open to having the conversation.
Sure. So in terms of more background on the sessions, I'd probably refer to one of the people who've been here longer than me. I just happened to sort of stumble into the Researchers Forum. I don't know if it was the first session, but certainly then I presented during the second session, and then I offered to be one of the moderators or hosts of developing this conversation, offering this session. So that's my experience so far with it but that's actually how I came to be more aware of the IACD in general, and the standards is through this forum. But is there anyone else here who can speak a little more? Sarah, thank you.
Yes, we think we've had 3 meetings. We started it largely because there was an interest amongst PhD students. We wanted to develop a forum for PhD researchers to share their research as well as more broadly. I think we've lost off some of the PhD students. So anybody who's got PhD students in the academic sphere, please encourage them to come. And the idea was IACD has an educators forum, and that this should be for people interested in and doing research. And so everybody who is a member of IACD would get an invitation. I mean, it comes out in the news bulletin that IACD publishes. So it seems to be designed for IACD members, but I think people who are non-members could potentially join. But that's the main on this. And when I saw Linda's message, it made me think we haven't got a system. We haven't got like a Google Groups, for example, or any way of us contacting each other. It's just simply through Jessica, who would send out a message saying the next meeting is on such and such, please register for the meeting. So if people were interested in having in IACD setting up a group, I'm guessing that Jessica could do that. So we could actually then talk to each other. If that's something that people wanted to do, they'd have to give permission to have their name on the group. And I think we thought we would meet, probably quarterly, as Laurie has said. And some of the earlier meetings, we had 3 presentations from 3 PhD students and had a discussion around that. This one has been very much discussion based. So we have the option of having somebody giving a talk about a piece of research that would be of interest, or developing having a theme or a discussion where we could do rather like what we've done today. So I think we're very open for suggestions, and maybe I'll ask Jessica if she thinks it would be feasible to set up a group that everybody could then talk to each other.
And I would just add to that. I mean, we have we've used WhatsApp for other things. So I don't know, Linda, if WhatsApp would be something that would be okay for you to use, but certainly it seems on a global basis that WhatsApp seems to be a popular tool.
That's maybe less good for sharing articles and ideas and stuff. I mean, it depends how people prefer to be contacted.
Yeah. So it definitely seems like something, I'm just mindful of time. Maybe what we can do, Jessica, if there's a way to reach out and to attendees afterwards and ask them if they would like to be connected in some sort of group. And then we can also ask, what types of formats might be useful. But is there anyone who would have a topic in mind for the next session, which could be in maybe late November? Could be a time, or January, or early December. I don't know. That seems like a busy time for academics, though, is December. But is there anyone who would be interested in hosting a session, and then we can work out the time afterwards? Is there anyone that feels this conversation is an important conversation to continue in some way, to look at what research is already done, and then to maybe invite someone in to do a presentation on some promising ways of addressing some of the challenges that were discussed?
I think that's certainly a possibility, but I guess possibly it might be also useful to get a new topic, because we could have 2 things at our next meeting, couldn't we? One might be following up on this, another might be somebody giving a short presentation on some research that they're doing, or a particular challenge or research topic.
Yeah, I mean, I would be happy to reach out to my friend Ryan Gibson, who submitted an article that was around the community economic development investment funds that are popular and in Canada and being used across the country. And he had written one of the articles that was there. But if someone else has an idea of something they would like to put forward or suggest, or a particular piece of research, and to have the researcher actually present on those more bright spot solution oriented pieces of information and research, by all means, it would be great to have someone else step up, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I'm just thinking there is an organization in Canada, I can't remember if it's in BC or Vancouver, and it's called the Tamarack Institute.
Yes,
and
I know the
it's a
Tamarack.
very good organization for research, for community development. They've got a lot of materials, and they could have some good speakers as well, based on around the type of subjects we've been talking about.
Well, I think they organised the community panel, didn't they, for the foundation in the first article that you gave us, Laurie? As far as I'm aware, they were supporting the community members. I think I might be wrong.
They were involved as a third party in that article, where the foundation was trying to use a more participatory approach. Yes, so there was definitely within that first article that was published in the Philanthropist.
So they might be able to report on how the details of how they felt that went, I guess. Another thing we could think of for future would be any particular methods that people have been using, or that people would just like to discuss that might be particularly appropriate for community development research. So, for example, participatory methods used in research. And I think on previous occasions, Jessica, we've sent out a message to all members saying the next meeting is on such and such a date, and would anybody like to contribute anything? So we could say the next meeting is, I think we should fix a date if we can. And we're going to have a little bit more on funding for research, democratic processes, and would anybody else like to present on a different topic? If we don't get anybody, fair enough, but if we do, then we can move forward on that.
We do actually have that we have an Excel spreadsheet with all the people that had expressed interest in joining this Researchers Forum group. So there is a list already of people, but yeah, the invitations then also go out to the rest of the IACD members. So it is open to anyone that wants to then subsequently join. I'm just thinking of what the best way would be to have the group sort of communicate. Because WhatsApp is quite easy, because I know that there's several IACD sort of in-country groups that use WhatsApp for these purposes as well. But
maybe less for sharing research ideas. That might be my prejudice. I don't want my WhatsApp app clogged up with all that sort of stuff. But
that's fair enough. I understand that too. So there might be another way to do it, which would be better for everyone.
Are there any thoughts on a time for the next session, either a month and or a day and a time, or should we send something around, Sarah, asking for suggestions for that?
Well, I think we should fix the date. I would propose it could be Monday the 27th of November or Monday the 11th of December. Those are two suggestions from me. Anybody else got any suggestions? Any preferences?
Probably November. Would be useful, Sarah. Thanks for that. And if I could add, just in the light of your comments with your colleague in Canada, if one part of the session might be what are the implications of adding the economic part to community development, economic development, just where that goes there, because in a sense, as I understand some of the initiatives here in terms of a public body's procurement has now committed to up to a certain kind of level, they will procure services from a community group. Now, I think that's where the community wealth building for me, moves it into the use of public money rather than always relying on charity money, if you want to put it that way. So anyway, your colleague might just open up some of that for us, from how you're doing that in Canada. So anyway, it's just a bias.
Yeah, there seemed to be interest in both the idea of participatory planning and how that's done well, and then also this idea of community wealth building or building independent resources for community development. So if there's interest, I could reach out to both the Tamarack Institute about the article published in The Philanthropist and see if there's someone who could do a short presentation on that goes deeper into that and available to answer questions. And then also reach out to Ryan about the investment funds article that he had shared and see if, and would that be of interest, like a couple of short 10-minute presentations and then an opportunity to ask people questions on those two topics?
Yeah,
great. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think that would be a good session if you can do that. So should we agree the 27th of November? Is that okay for people? And the time, it is a challenge. I don't know, what time is it now, Julian, for you in New Zealand? If you
about 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah, it's 2:30 a.m.
And so, Julian said the time's going to shift for him as well. So I think certainly going a bit earlier would be helpful.
Well, Musa, who's in West Coast USA, has said, could we go a bit later? We're not going to get it right for everybody, are we? So it's going to have to be staying up late for New Zealand and getting up early for West Coast North America. And I'm not quite sure where we put the compromise.
That's okay for me. We'll end up. We're going to go to summertime, so it won't be 1 o'clock in the morning. It'll be 2 o'clock in the morning. Doesn't make that much difference. I'm used to doing this international stuff.
Okay, Musa, was it 6 a.m. for you? Probably it was.
Yes, it was. And I wrote down 7:30 on my calendar.
Yeah.
So I don't know what happened. So anyway, I would respect if I have to wake up at 6:30 a.m. I will. I had a very busy weekend. We had graduation this weekend, so it was very, very intense. I couldn't. I went to bed late. But next time, I think it would not have graduation every week. So usually I get up early, but I was exhausted after a long graduation.
Yeah. Now, many parts of the world changed that. Some parts of the world are changing their clocks later in October. So by the time we get to 27th of November, our clocks will have gone back. I don't think New Zealand. Do you change your clocks in New Zealand?
Yeah, we'll be 13 hours ahead of UK.
Okay. So we just need to bear that in mind, whether we have it today. It's been 2 p.m. UK time, Jessica. Maybe
I can have a little look and see.
Yeah, see what is. It's going to be somewhere in that region, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think we need to finish because we've gone over. But Laurie, you've done an absolutely brilliant job. Emmanuel, Martin, the team. I think you've really raised a great topic for us, and it's obviously going to continue for next time. So, thank you ever so much, and thanks everybody for participating. And over to Laurie again. I see you've got elected anyway to the board of the IACD. So maybe this can be your role on the board, the research forum. But if you're willing to organise the next one, I think we'd all be very, very grateful. So a big thank you to Laurie.
Thank you, and thank you to Emmanuel and Martin for being involved in organising this one as well. And maybe another session could be more focused from a different area of the world. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye. Bye.